Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Jake, the Muslim Metaphysician, and today I'm here to talk to you guys about a recent video that's been going around. It's about a week or two ago now. I did a partial review on part one between Shaykh Uthman and Mr. Anthony Rogers was the main speaker, but there were two other Christian apologists that were there, Mr. David Wood, who I'm sure you're all familiar with, and also Sam Shamoun. So the three of them they showed up to Shaykh Uthman's Dawah stand that he's got out there in California. And I don't know exactly the reason, but Anthony Rogers in particular was the one who was speaking most of the time with the Shaykh. Now, like I said, in a previous video, I did a video on Allah and his attributes because that was it was a key thing in the first part of the discussion. So, and this is just being very broad. The first part of the discussion was mainly like models of God, comparing the Islamic conception of God, which is a rejection of divine simplicity and an affirmation of real attributes that subsist in Allah's essence. So there's one God, which is Allah, and he has these multiple attributes that subsist in his essence, versus a Trinitarian conception of God, which is supposedly one God with three distinct persons that are not identical to each other. And in the first part that was like the main point that they were kind of going back and forth debating on. So that's what I focused on in that video, was responding to this allegation. And I recommend that people go and watch the first part if they haven't already. This common Christian claim now that somehow the attributes of Allah in Islam are somehow analogous to the persons of the Trinity, such that Muslims have no reason to really complain about the multiplicity of persons in the Trinity, because we argue that compromises his oneness. And they're saying, well, you believe in these multiple real attributes in Allah. This is the same, or at least similar to the multiple persons in the Trinitarian Godhead. Therefore, you really have nothing to stand on. It's not meant to be necessarily a refutation. It depends how far they want to take it, right? But it's not necessarily a refutation of the Islamic conception of God. It's more like, well, you guys are saying we have this problem, but you supposedly have it too. Therefore, you cannot reject the Trinity just because of this multiplicity of persons. So that's kind of the argument. I went a little bit deep into it in my last video. You can go on my channel. It's basically Allah and his attributes. So I went to refuting that because that was a main part of their discussion in part one. In part two, however, it kind of, and not totally, but more so, went from Trinity versus Tawheed to the idea of the Incarnation and whether or not the Incarnation is somehow results in either a contradiction or merely just, a distasteful picture of God, So the Sheikh was arguing, obviously, that the incarnation, or this idea that God became a man and took on a human nature, that it's problematic. And obviously Rogers and some of these other, obviously Christians in general, would disagree with that. So I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to be doing a review. I'm not going to be playing literally every single minute of the clip, because the clip is about an hour long. So those who review videos, to do and play a whole clip of an hour long and review the entire thing minute by minute would take a lot of time. So I'm going to do a lot of it, but I'm not going to do the entire extent of it. But as I'm pulling up the video, let me just check out who's in the chat. Hopefully we've got some people here watching live. Just another quick reminder, I won't be paying as much close attention to the live chat. So if you have a specific comment or question that you want answered or put on the screen, please do send it as a super chat. Otherwise, I won't really be able to get to it. Now, let's see who we got here in the chat. We got a bunch of people here watching, people saying salam. We got Lopez here sending a $13.99 super sticker. Really appreciate that. Salam. And yes, Eid Mubarak to everyone. I hope that you guys had an amazing Eid with, your friends and family. I hope that everyone's doing well. Let's see what else we got here in the chat. If there's anything else to address before we start playing the video. Not really. Everybody just saying salam. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to play certain clips from the video, those that I think are most important. For a part of it, towards the latter half, I might be playing most of it because that's really where the crux of the issue was. And yeah, I'm going to be kind of dissecting Roger's conception of the incarnation, whether or not it's merely distasteful or is it really a contradiction? And I argue yes. So I'm willing to make that case. But let's do this here. Let me share my screen for you guys. 1 second here. Just give me 1 second here, guys. All right, guys, so I'm going to get ready to play this video. Like I said, if you really want your comment or question addressed as I'm going through this, I'm very busy. Please, anybody who wants to be a mod, who's a regular participant in my live streams, just send me a message. Please send me a message like on Twitter or Facebook because I can't really get to it in YouTube chats. And look, guys, this is a touchy subject. I know there's a lot going on right now. I know that... look, we totally reject the notion of the incarnation, but I have Christian people on here watching. If we really want the dawah to go out to these people, let's try to be respectful. Don't start with, calling names and being real nasty to people in the chat. Because I've been informed by Muslims even that people have been getting a little feisty in the chat. Let's try to keep this to a minimum. You guys know me. I try to make my videos informative and educational. I don't have a problem with you guys chatting and going back and forth in the chat, but pay attention to the video, guys. I mean, try your best to pay attention to the video. Maybe you'll learn something, inshallah, and be respectful in the chat. I don't care who you are, atheist, Christian, Muslim, whatever, because I just really, I'm not going to put up with the nonsense. We got to be respectful. But anyway, I'm going to play the video here, and I'm going to start with about 1:15. I thought there was an important point that Mr. Rogers mentioned, which I was somewhat surprised about, but on another hand, not. So let's take a look at what that actually is, inshallah. Bismillah.
You know the answer? Yeah, go ahead. My answer would be this, and I think this is something that we should have been discussing already.
Excellent.
We believe that we don't know anything about God, apart from God's own voluntary revelation of himself.
Excellent.
So we are all beholden to him, right? We are dependent on him for life and breath as well as anything we know about him. Right? And anything we know about him that's true is what he's told us. Anything we think we know independently of that is not something we can know to be true. Now, so what I'm getting at is, in the Bible, God revealed himself through the prophets and prepared.
So listen to that. That first of all, you have right from the beginning, okay? You have, when we start talking about the incarnation, because that's what the subject matter is, you have Anthony Rogers explicitly say that we do not know anything about God apart from revelation. Well, as Muslims, we don't make this claim. And I don't know if Rogers was just, speaking off the top of his head. But honestly, I'm not going to give him that much I'm not going to give him that much respect in that regard, because I think he actually kind of meant this. We don't know anything about God apart from revelation. Well, what does that say about natural theology, Mr. Rogers? Do you completely reject natural theology? Can we logically and from a rational or philosophical perspective deduce that God exists? Or are you a complete presuppositionalist? Can we know that God exists? Can we know something about God? I think, and he would admit this, that we couldn't possibly deduce the Trinity purely from a philosophical perspective. If he says yes, then he's refuting his own statement, because that's something we can know about God apart from revelation. Or maybe he means revelation in a broader sense to include God's natural revelation. So you have general revelation, sometimes people call it, and specific revelation. Well, here's the thing, Anthony. If we know certain things about God through general revelation, then, which is basically revelation that's available to all of mankind, things that we can experience in ourselves and in nature. And then you have specific revelation, which is basically a specific scripture or holy text, or, the prophet speaking, telling us what God's plan is, salvation, who he is, etc. If he means in a sense of specific revelation that we can only know about God through something like the Bible, and we can't know anything apart from that about God, well, then that's just ridiculous, because we can deduce from a rational perspective that God exists through creation, that there's a creator, that there's a designer to the universe, these type of things, that God's oneness. There's several different things that we can rationally deduce, and then the text of Scripture gives us more. But that additional information that the text of Scripture gives can never and should never conflict with natural theology or natural or general revelation. So I was a bit surprised he didn't really qualify that statement. If he meant, and he was including general revelation within that, well, then okay, yeah, like people just don't make up their own stuff, right? God has this general revelation and he's got specific revelation. But one of the big problems for the Trinity is that it doesn't seem to be available to general revelation. It seems only to be specific revelation. And one question to think about, this is just a sidebar, something I brought up before, but should God be intuitive in the sense that apart from specific revelation, my intuition is that we should be able to deduce that God exists. And if that God exists, we should be able to know the fundamental basics about him. Now, it seems amazing to me that God would be this one God that exists amongst three persons. And yet he didn't make that rationally accessible to us apart from specific revelation, like in a holy scripture. I find that very strange. Like a man living on an island somewhere would never come up with this idea of a Trinity, wouldn't know anything about it. So I don't know how he would really be held accountable for such a thing. But anyway, let's get back to the stream. I'm going to skip forward a little bit to about the 4-minute mark. So just give me 1 second here. 450. Where, originally Shaykh Uthman is objecting to the incarnation, and David Wood tries to bring up an example. He says there's a difference between something being highly improbable and something being a contradiction. And I actually agree with that. And I'm going to use that as a basis for the rest of the discussion. So let's
Can I add a possible example real quick? Because I think, well, let me give you an example. If someone came up to me and said that they have a time machine in their pocket, okay, I would not believe it for a second. Okay. It's not because I don't believe it's possible. It's just I believe that's extraordinarily unlikely, and you would have to provide me with some very good evidence. Excellent. Okay. For that, right? Good. If someone came up to me and they said they have a square circle in their pocket, I would regard that as impossible.
Thank you.
So
with it.
Yeah. So what
when you get with it, then I'll give you.
Those are two things.
So notice what he said there. He said, if somebody came up to me and told me they had a time machine in their pocket, I wouldn't believe it because it's highly improbable, but not because it's impossible or logically contradictory. But he said, if somebody came up to me and said I had a square circle in my pocket, I wouldn't believe it, and I could never believe it because it's a contradiction. And he's implying that contradictions don't exist or impossible. He doesn't believe in true contradictions. I agree that there's a good distinction there between something that's highly improbable that you wouldn't believe in because it just seems fantastic, and something that is actually a logical contradiction like a square circle that you would never believe in because no matter how much time you had, no matter what evidence the person gave, because it's a contradiction and contradictions don't exist. Now, this is a key point. Remember this for my later critique of the incarnation as we go through this, inshallah.
And then there's things that I would just regard as possible. If you say, hey, there's a married bachelor over there. So I don't know.
Exactly.
If you say, you know, but so anyway.
That's good, excellent example.
If someone were to come up and say, you know, something about someone being incarnate or something like that, then we're Christians, so we believe in that revelation. We believe in the revelation we have, so we don't believe that sort of thing's going to happen. So we would dismiss it. As far as
so you would dismiss it on basically your beliefs.
Yeah.
Okay. Hold on. Let me respond to. Come on, bro. Can I respond to him now, man?
Well, I wasn't finished.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes,
I'm not.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is, in other words, since we're Christians, we believe that God has sent his revelation and there's no more incarnations or anything coming along, right? So we would say, oh, we're Christians, we believe that. But if we weren't Christians and we were just saying, hey, if God has the power to do what he wants, if God wanted to enter creation and do this, our point is we wouldn't say, I reject that because it's an impossibility or a contradiction. We would say, that sounds really far-fetched, so you're going to have to give me some really good evidence. We wouldn't regard it as a contradiction. I know what Anthony's point, what he was saying about all this background knowledge and prophecies and so on, is he's saying we do have good evidence, and so that's why we would dismiss it. Because if someone just came along and said, hi, I'm Jesus, I'm the divine son of God who entered creation, we would say, no, what are you talking about, man?
Excellent. Can I speak now, bro? Are you done? All right, thank you.
Okay, so in that, David Wood gives another example of a married bachelor, and he's trying to distinguish between something that's highly improbable and something that's a contradiction. Now, as I said, we agree. There's two different things. Like if somebody says, I got a time machine, it's not, and it could be in a certain context. You could argue that it's contradictory to, sort of be able to time travel. You got things like the certain paradoxes associated with time travel. But let's leave that aside. Let's give them the example, okay? Let's say it's possible you could have a time machine that you could time travel, okay? It's highly improbable, so it'd be a little bit strange to just believe somebody right away if they say, hey, I got a time machine in my pocket. Now, if somebody says, hey, I got a married bachelor in my pocket, or, hey, look over there, that guy, he's a married bachelor. Nobody would believe that. Or say, hey, I got this square circle. It's in my backyard. Or it's in my pocket. You want to see it? Why? Because something that's contradictory is logically impossible, okay? A square circle is contradictory, therefore it's logically impossible. So nobody's going to believe that you have a square circle in your pocket. Now, the question is the incarnation more akin to a time machine that seems highly improbable without evidence given, or is it more akin to a square circle? I argue, and I'm going to argue, that it is akin to a square circle and that it is a contradiction. Therefore, no matter what supposed physical evidence or gymnastics you want to play to give examples for this, unless you solve the logical problem to, at minimum, show that it's logically possible in the same way that to show a square circle is logically impossible, I'm not going to believe anything you have to say about it. You have to show that it's a logical possibility, which I'm going to argue that it's not. Okay? So I got a couple quotes here based on this, and I have a video on my channel called The Logical Problem of the Incarnation. Now, we want to know and understand what the logical problem of the incarnation is. Now, I'm going to go to I'm going to go to a proper Christian apologist who, quite frankly, I respect much more than any of these three guys, Rogers, Wood, and Shamoon. I'm not trying to pick on them, but in terms of the philosophy, William Lane Craig, who I'm going to quote for him, is on another level compared to these guys. These guys are chumps compared to him. But in this text, he's got a text, Philosophical Foundations for a Christian Worldview. See, I read your guys' texts, okay? This is by J.P. Moreland and William Lane Craig. He's got a whole bunch of different stuff, but on this one, it's called Christian Doctrines. It's the Incarnation. You see, I got it highlighted here, bro. I'm doing my homework. I go through their stuff to try to understand this stuff, even if I don't agree with it. Try to accurately represent it and then critique it as best and fair as possibly can. So he says this literally, okay? Literally on the first quote he has. Listen to this. The Incarnation, he says, the person of Christ is the bankruptcy of logic. Now, this is by Herbert Maurice Relton, A Study in Christology. Craig literally opens his chapter on the Incarnation with a quote from Herbert Maurice Relton, who admits that the person of Christ is the bankruptcy of logic. So he's saying, if you believe in the person of Christ, you're throwing out, logic is being thrown out the window. Okay. Now, here's another quote. Speaking about the Incarnation, this is the second paragraph, guys. And as I showed it highlighted already. Craig, this is Craig's quote now, what Craig is saying. William Lane Craig, the famous Christian apologist and philosopher. This is what he says about the Incarnation. Now, remember David Wood's example about a married bachelor in square circle. Remember that. But if anything appears to be a contradiction, surely this is it. Whoa, listen to that. If somebody like William Lane Craig is opening in the second paragraph on the Incarnation, starts with that sentence, Muslims, this should tip you off to something. You need to study this doctrine, because he's admitting on the face of it, this looks absurd. This looks like a huge problem. Okay. Christians, I suggest you read into it as well. He says, but if anything appears to be a contradiction, surely this is it. How can Jesus be both God and man, which is the claim of the Incarnation, that he was one person with two complete natures. He was fully God and fully man. So how can Jesus be both God and man, infinite and finite, creator and creature? How can we unite in a single person both omniscience and ignorance, omnipotence and weakness, moral perfection and moral perfectibility? The attributes of deity seem to drive out the attributes of humanity, so that it seems logically inconsistent to affirm with the historic Christian church that Jesus is truly God and truly man. Close quote. That's what Craig says. He says that it seems logically inconsistent to affirm with the historic Christian church that Jesus is truly God and truly man. So now, obviously, Craig goes on further to give an argument and try to give a model of the Incarnation to where he thinks that he somehow solves the logical problem of the Incarnation, which he told you what the logical problem is. The logical problem is, how does a single person, a single individual, have two sets of contradictory attributes? Omnipotence, which means to be all-powerful, and yet he's weak. Omniscience, which means to be all-knowing, and yet he's ignorant, means he doesn't know certain things. And you can do this with any of the contradictory sets of attributes between man and God. How is it that a single individual can be contradictory in that way? Now, I got a video on this specific problem, the logical problem of the Incarnation, which I suggest you guys check out. But then I also did a recent video on something called, actually, let me get you the exact, let me see if I can get you guys here the exact title of the video because I don't want to give you the wrong video title. Sorry, I do a lot on YouTube, so sometimes I forget the exact name. So it was called, "Is Your Favorite Christian Apologist a Heretic?" Now, within that video, I go into a specific problem related to the incarnation. And one of the things I go into is this issue of Nestorianism and whatever. That's a whole nother issue. But within that, I explain that there's a recent book that came out, which is called The Contradictory Christ by J.C. Beale, who is a Christian. And he believes that the incarnation and the problem that I just quoted from William Lane Craig, he believes that Christ literally is a contradictory being. But he believes it's true, and so therefore he believes in true contradictions. What I say to Mr. J.C. Beale, with all due respect, is that I accepting true contradictions is a heavy cost, okay? I think even he would agree with that. Now, when you not only accepting about things like the liar's paradox or other certain logical puzzles, but you're applying it to the creator of the universe and the very God himself in terms of this being of Christ, right? That's when you're going way too far, man. Like, liar's paradox, all right. I don't believe it's a contradiction. I think liar's paradox can be solved without accepting something called diatheletism, which is the idea that true contradictions exist. I don't think we have to accept that. But even if we did, why would we apply it to Christ? I mean, or God or the Messiah, one of the greatest prophets. I just think it's an unnecessary step. It's a heavy cost in one's metaphysical theory. And I'm just not up for doing that. But the thing I like about J.C. Beale is he admits it. He says, look, this is a logical contradiction. And this guy is a logician. He's a proper logician, J.C. Beale, and he's a Christian. He says, look, guys, Christ is a contradictory being. There's nothing you can do about it. It is what it is. Let me actually read a quote from his book, just so you guys don't think I'm making this up, because the guy is a Christian, and I've read this quote from here before. Let me just get it for you real quick. One second here. And like I said, if you guys have any comments or questions that need urgently to be addressed, make sure you send it as a super chat. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to go back and track all that stuff down as I'm going through this stuff. So, okay. So let's see here. Just give me 1 second as I get this up here. Actually, as I'm trying to get this quote up, let me just scroll through the comments and see what everybody's got going on here. I don't see anything else. Everybody chilling in the chat. Alhamdulillah. Okay. Yeah, okay. So here's a quote. This is what J.C. Beale says in his book, The Contradictory Christ, okay? The quest to consistentize Christ, or the quest to give a consistent solution to what Richard Cross in 2011 famously dubbed the fundamental problem of Christology, which is the study of Christ, enjoys a long, fascinating history. And the quest continues in full force up through today. But I believe, he says, that the quest should end. I believe that Christian thinkers should accept the contradiction of Christ. Christ is a contradictory being. So goes the central thesis of this book. At the crux of Christian theology is a contradiction. Namely, Christ Jesus is a being of whom some claims are both true and false. That's it. Okay, so I'm not making this up. I'm not making this up at all, guys. He's literally saying, look, this is what the contradiction of Christ is. He goes on to explain in the book. He goes on to address Christian thinkers who have tried to solve this contradictory problem of having two sets of contradictory attributes in a single person. He says, look, guys, none of it works. If you think it's true, just embrace that it's a true contradiction and pack your bags and go home. I mean, that's it. So I agree with Mr. Wood's sentiments that there's something different between something that is highly improbable, like a time machine, and something that's a logical contradiction, like a square circle. My claim, as well as some Christian philosophers like J.C. Beale, is that it actually is a contradiction. He just says it's a true contradiction. I say because it's a contradiction, therefore it has to be false. I'm not going to accept that. So that's kind of the issue there. Let me see here where we are next, because I got some notes here just to check on the video where we need to go next. Let me see here. Give me 1 second. Just want to make sure that we're going to the right spot. Where is it? Okay, by the way, we got Ahmed Ashraf as a new member. Do consider becoming a paid YouTube member on the channel. It helps out a lot. Appreciate it. Much love to Brother Ahmed. Yeah, so do consider that. You get special perks. I know I've been saying this for a while, but inshallah this weekend, maybe tomorrow, I'm going to do a live stream with only YouTube members where you'll be able to ask me anything. And it'll be kind of exclusive with maybe 50 people or so. So if you want to get in on that, do consider clicking that join button and becoming a YouTube member. In the meantime, let's get back to this here. All right, so I'm going to share my screen again. And I'm going to go to... there was a section in between there where they brought up the issue of the Quran being a form of intercession for the Muslims. The Shaykh explained that it's in terms of the deeds of reciting the Quran and reading the Quran. It's not like the Quran is an actual entity that's going to hop around and be like, hey, guys, I'm the Quran. It's not like that. And he said that it was in the form of a pale man. And he said that they said that it was in... hadith collection from Tirmidhi, but they couldn't actually find it, and it turns out that it wasn't actually in there. As far as I understand it, the Sheikh mentioned that it's not in there. I don't think they were ever actually able to come up with it. But anyway, we're going to move on to section 2130 in the video. I'm going to fast forward over to there. And let's see that, inshallah.
Okay, so I want to understand. Okay, so let me understand what you affirm. You're saying Jesus came to earth and became a man.
Absolutely.
So was he that all-powerful, all-being, has no needs God at that time or not?
He was both God and man.
Again, that's like a square circle,
You
right?
can say that's like
because
a square circle.
God has no needs.
You see that? The Sheikh said, see, that's like a square circle. So he's claiming, he's referring back to what they already said. He's saying, yeah, it is like a square circle, bro. And then obviously Rogers doesn't think so, but let's continue watching.
Right?
As his divine nature. So think of it this way. I mean, it's not that hard, really.
It is hard because it's confusing. It's like a square circle.
You're asserting that it is. But
To me, it is.
there hasn't been a demonstration of that. What I'm getting at is as God. So as an example, you think man has a soul, man has
Yes.
a body.
Yes.
Right? Your soul and your body are not the same thing. They're both you.
True.
We don't want to get into a whole tangent here.
I'm with you.
But
Keep
there are
going.
things that are true of you bodily that aren't true of you in terms of your soul or spirit.
Okay.
Right? If your body dies, does your soul die?
No.
No. As Christians, we believe Christ is both God and man, just like man is body and soul. Right? Man has those two constituent elements. But so all I'm saying is, although the attributes of Christ as God are such as he is omniscient, omnipotent, omnibenevolent, all of these things, his human attributes and qualities are most definitely character. He's in one place at one time. He gets hungry. He slept. He wept.
Did he go to the bathroom?
He absolutely did.
God went to the bathroom.
God became flesh
and went to the bathroom.
Dwelt among us. And
did he get diarrhea?
So Rogers is using the example as he says in the same way, or in a similar way, that man is both body and soul, and there's things that are true of your body that are not true of your soul, and vice versa. The incarnation is the same thing. Now, we're going to investigate that claim to see whether or not it's analogous, and I'm going to demonstrate that Rogers' own words show that it's not analogous. His analogy falls apart, and we're going to see why.
Secured salvation. He died on the cross. What more do you want?
That's pretty.
What more do you want than that? Huh?
You are Muslim, aren't you? This is a secret, right? He got tortured.
Absolutely.
God got tortured.
Plucked out. His back was whipped.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And he cried out to who?
He cried out to his father.
But he didn't say father. He said God.
But
he said my God. But he is God.
Yes.
That doesn't make sense now. Again, that doesn't make sense.
We already talked about that earlier.
And it didn't make sense earlier. But let me.
Well, then it doesn't make sense to say Allah has sifat.
Of course it does.
No.
Allah's sifat are a part of Him. Allah's sifat don't separate. Allah's sifat don't need to go to the bathroom.
Allah's sifat.
Go ahead.
You believe that the Quran is the instantiation?
See, again, now he's trying to go back to the attributes issue, and which I dealt with in the previous stream, so I'm not going to really touch on that much. But he's saying again, Christ having two natures is analogous. So before he tried to use the Trinity as example, now he's using. So check this out. This is to show you how inconsistent these Christian apologists are. And I'm not saying all of them. I'm saying these guys. I think mainly they're kind of jokers. But if you remember in the first video, they compared the attributes of Allah to the persons of the Trinity. Now, in order to say, hey, what are you guys complaining about? You guys got a problem. It's the same thing here. So wait, if the attribute of Allah is the same thing as a person or similar, now in this section when we're talking about the incarnation, which is one person with two natures. See, look, check this out. The Trinity is one being or one nature, three persons. The incarnation is a mirror image of that. It's the opposite. It is one person with two natures. So in the Trinity, you have one nature, three persons. In the incarnation, you have one person, two natures. So now what he did was he said analogously in the same way that we have multiple persons with one nature in the Trinity, you have one nature with multiple attributes. So he compared the attributes to the persons. Now what he's doing is with the incarnation, he's comparing the multiple natures to the multiple attributes in God. Well, wait, hold on a second. You just flipped the switch. If the attributes were akin to persons, how could the attributes be both analogous to persons and yet natures, which you say that the natures and persons are fundamentally two different things? In order for you to get the Trinity off the ground, you have to make a distinction between nature and person. When it comes to the Trinity, you say that the persons are analogous to the attributes of Allah. And then when it comes to the incarnation, you say, no, it's not the persons that are analogous because in Christ there's only one person. But you say it's the natures, the two natures aspect, the multiplicity of natures is analogous to the multiplicity of attributes in Allah. So which one is it? Is it nature that is similar to the attributes of God? Or is it persons? Or is it both? And if it's both, then that means they would have to be similar to each other. And if it is, then it destroys the whole Trinity. Because the Trinity is based on the whole assumption that person and nature are different. So, I mean, it's just a hypocritical argument. it doesn't really work. To me, it seems like a case of, well, anytime the Christian gets into a problem, whether it be with the Trinity or incarnation, he's just trying to go to Allah and his attributes. And I already destroyed that whole argument in the last video, so I suggest people go watch it. But let's continue watching, inshallah.
I just told you earlier.
No, I heard
No, you didn't.
I did.
No Muslim says that this right in your hand is a part of Allah.
Well, first of all, that's not even an error.
Exactly. So for you to lift this up doesn't make any sense, right?
But you knew what I meant.
I do.
This represents that.
And I will tell you, as I told David, when you didn't listen, I guess, but I'll say it again. You guys want to be... All right,
no,
there you go.
All right. But I'm also finding what you want, because I can get it really quickly.
Okay, so now the issue gets to be the sifat of Allah are a part of Allah. Even if Allah reveals, you understand the difference between revealing and becoming separate, right? The sifat of Allah never have weaknesses. You can burn the written copy because that's not the Quran. The Quran is what is recited. It cannot be corrupted. Somebody can make a mistake in their reading, but their reading is not the sifat of Allah. Now, Jesus saying, my God,
Jesus' human nature is not part of his divine essence.
Okay, so that's a confusing.
So hear that he says Jesus's. Let's just rewind that. Let's just make it precise. Okay, I don't want to misquote the guy. This is an important part, though.
The sifat of Allah. Now Jesus saying, "My God,"
Jesus' human nature is not part of his divine essence.
Okay,
so Jesus's human nature is not part of the divine essence. That's a claim.
That's the confusing part here, because you're saying that the soul is a part of me. Without the soul, I can't exist. Right?
You
So
are your soul.
you are. Thank you. So if you are your.
Now look at what he just said here. It's going to conflict with his earlier statement. He said, "You are your soul," meaning that you are identical to your soul. Before, he used the example of the incarnation being like two natures, where you have, it's the same thing as man, that he's both a soul and a body. And one is physical and one's immaterial, supposedly, right? So he says this is analogous to the idea of the incarnation of having two sets of contradictory attributes, because you got these things that are true of the soul that are not true of the body, and vice versa. But now he explicitly states that you are your soul. And I agree with this. Okay? Tentatively speaking, I agree with this, that you are your soul. Now, if we go with this, Mr. Anthony, that you are your soul, then the things that you can predicate of the body aren't necessarily predicated of you, because you are your soul. You're not your body, according to your own words. And I'm going to give more examples for why this is a reason that we should actually think so. One, for Mr. Anthony, is in the case of Jesus, and two is in the case of the what's called the intermediate state in Christianity, and I'll explain what that is in Islam as well, which I also agree with, because it's a thought experiment to get you to think about this issue. But let me get back to playing the video.
Soul, and then Jesus is his soul, and you're saying that's God. So for God to be now saying my God makes you know that doesn't make sense.
No. But you misunderstood me.
Okay.
Christ has both a human soul and a human body, and his divine nature. Man
so
is both
Christ is three things now.
No, well, this is classic Christianity.
This is excellent.
You're just learning this.
I'm just learning it from you,
Okay,
because you're such a good explainer.
This is classic Chalcedonian. You've
Excellent.
Chalcedon, right?
I have.
Chalcedon was a Christian creed, 451. The classic Chalcedonian statement is just like man is body and soul, God and man is one Christ.
Okay, so, let me just ask that. Let me just ask, because I want to understand that. Let me just, okay. So Christ, according to you, he was human, he had a soul,
real body and soul,
and he was God. That's three things in Christ.
So Christ had a real human body and soul. Pay attention to that. He also had a will. Anthony didn't explicitly state this, but I know he believes that.
So he has all the attributes of humanity, body and soul, and he has a divine nature.
So that's what I just said, right?
So human nature and divine nature.
So he has a soul.
Absolutely.
When was his soul created?
So again, the soul of Christ,
Anthony.
it's human.
Okay, so when was his human soul created?
Christ became man when he became incarnate.
So the soul, it's a very simple question. It's okay. Nobody else got it. Go ahead.
Yeah.
When was his soul created? The soul of Christ.
I'm saying that the humanity of Christ, body and soul,
Yes.
starts at the point of conception, the virgin birth.
Okay. Can you give me any reference to the Bible about when the soul of Jesus was created, as you just gave that answer, but about the soul?
So the Bible teaches that man's soul is formed along with his body. It's formed within him.
Okay,
so
man.
Psalm 139,
Okay.
among others, talks about the fact that God knits people together in their mother's womb. This is, from the Christian perspective, the time when man himself comes into existence.
So Jesus came into existence as a man.
Is human.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
human nature.
so Jesus' soul.
Zechariah 12:10 also makes 12:1.
Those are not about Jesus, right? Those are general.
Those are about
human
beings.
beings.
About souls and bodies.
I asked you about Jesus' soul particularly.
So, just like you reasoned earlier,
Okay.
from the general to the particular,
I'm with you.
all I'm saying is,
So you're saying the general rules about humanity are why you're taking the fact in your mind
Because
that
in this
Jesus' soul came in. So Jesus had no soul until he was in the womb of Mary.
he had no human soul until.
Gotcha. And when he came in the womb of Mary, his soul came into creation.
So yeah, his body and soul originate at that
Gotcha.
time.
And his body. And when he died, according to you on the cross, where did his soul go?
His body died. His soul remained united to his divine nature.
Okay.
And he ascended into heaven.
So before.
So hear what he said. He said his body died, his soul remained united to the divine nature, and he ascended into heaven. So he's given this picture as if Christ's body, he left it behind and he didn't take the body into heaven. Well, if Christ's body did not ascend into heaven, and let me just remove this for a second. Let's think about this. Let's do this thought experiment. So first, Rogers tries to draw an analogy between the incarnation, which is one person, Christ, having two sets of contradictory attributes. He says that's analogous to one person or human being having a soul and a body. Now, he says in the beginning, he says, you are your soul and body, right? And that there's certain things that you can say that are true of the body that aren't true of the soul and vice versa. And if that's the case, then what's the big contradiction? You have the same issue even as a human being. It's not really an issue. It's the same thing with Christ having two sets of contradictory attributes. But then he goes on to say to the Shaykh, he says, you are your soul. And the Shaykh goes, yeah. And he fist bumps him. He's like, yeah, I can agree with that, bro. It's like, I can get down with that, crook. And they both fist bump and they're like, yeah, you are your soul. Now, the issue is if you are your soul, then his analogy doesn't work. And when he says you are your soul, what does that mean? Who is the you? If the you is the person of the human being, then that means the soul itself is sufficient for human personhood. If the soul itself is the you or the personal pronoun, and it's sufficient for human personhood, and Christ had a human soul, then that would mean that Christ was a human person. But guess what? Classical Chalcedonian Christology, which Rogers goes on to quote and draw from, is the idea that Christ was only one person, which was a divine person, with two complete natures, fully God, divine nature, fully man, human nature. If you say, Anthony Rogers, that Christ, or you say that the soul is who you are your soul, that the soul, the human soul, is responsible for personal identity, then that means if Christ had a human soul, then he would also be a human person. And that would mean then that you would have Nestorianism. You would have one person, which is the divine person, who was a person prior to the incarnation. He takes on a human nature, which is a human soul and a human body, which is sufficient for human personhood, because Rogers says that you are your soul, which means that the soul itself would be sufficient for human personhood. That means if Christ had a human soul, he would be two persons. If Christ was two persons, that's Nestorianism, which is a heresy. And I argue actually that classical Chalcedonian Christology is fundamentally Nestorian because of this problem. And that's why many of the Nestorians actually were happy with the Chalcedonian Creed. They said, yeah, we're cool with it because it fit with their understanding that Christ really was two persons. So people really need to understand this point. Second thing is, like I said, when he says that you are your soul, that contradicts his own argument, because he said in order to make the analogy between the soul and body of a human to Christ, who has two complete natures, it would have to mean that I am my soul body composite or together. but he said that I am my soul. Therefore, anything you predicate of the body doesn't have to be predicated of the soul, so there's no contradiction. I mean, there's no contradiction in what Rogers is stating, because he said that you are your soul, which means I am not my body. If I'm not my body, then there's no contradiction. However, with Christ, if the one person of Christ includes both the human and divine natures. Now, another thing to consider here, Mr. Rogers, you say that Christ had a human soul and human body. The body died when Christ ascended into heaven. He ascended with the human nature united, or the human soul, I should say, united to the divine nature. If it was the divine nature plus the human soul and not the human body, then I have a question for you. Is Christ everlastingly one person with two natures? Is he everlastingly, meaning forever going forward? Will he always be one person with two natures, fully God and fully man? If you say no, well, then that seems to be a problem, because Christians that I speak to say he's forever God and man. So that seems to be a huge issue. Second thing is, if you say that Christ, well, we're going to obviously say that Christ was still fully divine. Was Christ still fully human when he ascended to heaven? If you say yes, which is the only logical answer you get left, it's either yes or no. If Christ was still fully human and he didn't have a human body, what does that tell you? That a human soul is sufficient for humanity, and that a human body is not necessary for humanity or a human nature, which means the analogy between a soul-body composite and the two natures doesn't work, because the nature of man doesn't necessitate a human body. That's an example from Christ himself, because he ascended into heaven without a body, supposedly by Rogers. If he didn't have the body, was he still fully man? If he was still fully man, that means he doesn't need the human body in order to be considered fully man. And if he didn't need a body in order to be considered fully man, that the analogy between the body and soul and Christ's two natures isn't going to fly. It doesn't work. It doesn't get off the ground. Second point to consider is, Mr. Rogers, question for you. Do you believe in what's called the intermediate state, which is that especially believers, when they die, which Paul seems to allude to this, I think it's in 1 Corinthians 15, if my memory serves me correct. The intermediate state is the doctrine which says that when human beings die, like Roger said, which we also as Muslims agree with, the body dies, right? And part of the general resurrection at the end of the days, or on Judgment Day, I should say, is that God resurrects the human bodies and unites them with the human souls. Same bodies with the same human souls. Now, the question is, what do you believe in the intermediate state? The intermediate state is that there is an existence, that the person or the soul has an existence without being attached to the human body. Now, during this intermediate state, Mr. Rogers, is that human soul apart from the human body, is that still a human? Is that still fully man, or is he part man? If he's still fully man, then yet again, this is another example in which the human soul is apart from the human body, and yet you're still calling it fully man or fully human, which means that the body is not necessary. It's just merely accidental to the human nature. Because if you say that he's not a fully human, then what is he? If he's not a man, what is he? It's just a human soul, and he's not fully human. He's only partly human. That's a bit of a stretch. You want to accept that? Be my guest. But then you have to say that Jesus Christ, because he didn't have the body, is not fully man now. He's only fully God and part man because he has a soul, but he doesn't have the body. You don't want to go down that route, my brother. You don't want to go down that route. So we have Christ as an example. Second example we have as the intermediate state. If you accept the intermediate state, that before the after death, prior to the general resurrection or judgment day, human souls have an existence and they're alive. They're not dead in that sense. That they have an existence apart from the human body. Is that, first of all, is that a human nature? Or is it partly human nature? If it's partly human nature, then Christ only has part of a human nature because he doesn't have a human body right now in heaven, according to Rogers. Secondly is that soul, human soul, is that still a human person in terms of the intermediate state? If he's not still a human person, then what in the world is he? He's part of a man, and he's not fully, he doesn't have a full human nature in the intermediate state. And check this out, he's not a full human person. Well, that means that the soul is not sufficient for human personhood. That means he needs a body in order to be a person, which makes no sense. Then at what point in the stage of development in the womb, for example, and this has implications for abortion, at what point does the full body develop? At what point in that stage of development with the physical body is it a human person? If it's at conception and the body is not fully there, then that means it has to be the soul that's sufficient for the person. And this is going to have big implications for your Christology, my friend, Mr. Rogers. Well, let's go on. Let's listen to a little bit more. But this is the main crux of the issue, and that's why I'm getting a little bit repetitive, because I want people to really understand what this is. Let me play a little bit more, inshallah. Bismillah.
Before that time, there was no soul, but there was Jesus, and then before Jesus was born, he had no soul.
Right.
So then God increased the soul of Jesus later. That's what you just said.
That's not at all what I said.
Okay, let me repeat it again. Let me say what I said, and you can correct me. Anthony, we got this. Okay.
So you laugh track over here.
People laugh. It's okay. So now, when you said that Jesus had no soul before his human conception, right? So there was Jesus, part of God. There was God himself, and then the Holy Ghost. We're not even going to go there. Okay. Then Jesus came to the womb of Mary, and a soul was created. They didn't exist before. Then you're saying no. You're saying no? Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were shaking your head. Okay, so then Jesus was born with a human soul and a human body and a godly nature, 3 components. Then he goes on a cross and he dies, and his body dies. His soul now, that was newly created, now becomes a part of God. No? That's exactly what you said. Okay, tell me what you said. Tell me what you said.
Just like you said to me earlier, not putting words in your mouth.
I'm not.
For me, I didn't say anything like that.
You guys got it on video, but go ahead.
We got it on video.
Good. Tell me again.
What I told you, you said his soul increased, and I never said anything along those lines either. What I said is very clear, and this is just classic Christian theology. Right? Chalcedon is just solidifying what was always taught by Christians. At Chalcedon, it says that Christ took on a true human nature. Human nature is a body-soul entity. Right? Man is an ensouled being, an embodied soul. Okay? So when Christ takes on a human nature, he takes.
So now notice what he says. He goes flip-flops back and says that a human nature is a body and a human soul. Human soul, human body. Question, Mr. Anthony, in the intermediate state, is that still a full human nature when it doesn't have the human body and it only has the human soul? If you say no, then he's only partly human. What is he? If he's not, and is he a human person without the human body? Same thing with Christ. You want to affirm that Christ everlastingly will be truly God and truly man. If the human body is necessary in order to be fully human and have a full human nature, and he doesn't have that body in heaven, well, then he's not fully human. He's no longer fully human. He left the body. Now he's not fully human. That's a huge problem for you.
Takes into union with himself a full human nature, body and soul. When the body dies, the soul doesn't cease to exist. And so when Christ died physically, his soul didn't cease to exist. Neither did it separate the union that had already been established at the Incarnation between Christ as a divine person and that human soul. They're still fundamentally united. The soul doesn't become a part of the Godhead, right? It still remains a human soul. Okay. It never becomes a part of the divine nature.
So you have it on video, and so do we. Yeah. But I'm going to repeat this again. Okay, so there was no soul before Jesus was in the womb of Mary, right? Okay. So Jesus came in the womb. God created a new soul.
Yeah.
For Jesus.
Yeah, we don't.
Became a part of Jesus.
We have a different conception of what the soul is.
So okay, let's just keep going. Soul, body, connected. Okay, he came out on earth. You're with me, Anthony?
Yes.
Okay. He goes to the cross. He gets killed, according to you. Now his soul and body separate. His soul that was not a part of the God union before, was not a part of Jesus before. Where does that soul go?
It remains his soul.
And where does he go?
He goes back to the Father.
So the Father now has an increased soul. You said it, and you said it again, and now you're denying it. All right, Anthony. Thank you.
Wait a minute. When you say you believe that Allah raised Jesus to himself, you believe that eventually someday you guys are all going to go. Well, somebody's going to Jannah, right? Somebody's going to heaven.
Every Muslim, Allah makes us.
Say they're added to Allah, like they're some part of his nature.
We do not believe. Let me respond. We do not believe we in Jannah are a part of Allah.
And neither do I.
But you said no. But you said Jesus is a part of God.
No.
We're talking about Jesus' soul.
I said
you got God, bro. It's over. It's over. Thank you.
You've been asserting.
It's over, man. Look, it's over. It's over. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. It's okay.
Yeah, you can get.
Thank you.
We'll bring Sam in here in just a second.
We do not believe we in Jannah are a part of Allah.
And neither do I.
But you said no. But you said Jesus is a part of God.
No.
We're talking about Jesus' soul.
I said.
You got God, bro. It's over. It's over. Thank you.
You've been asserting.
It's over, man. Look, it's over. It's over. Thank you. Thank you. It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, you can get.
Thank you.
We'll bring Sam in here in just a second. But we need to be clear here. I never said that Christ's soul becomes part of the deity. That was your claim. That was your claim.
I'm glad this is recorded.
I'm so glad because I'm going to show.
Okay, so where does that soul go? Where does the soul go?
What does it have to do with where does the soul go?
Jesus' soul. Where does it go?
Do you think if somebody's soul goes to heaven, it becomes part of God?
No.
Well, neither do I.
But you said Jesus' soul connected with him. It doesn't separate and goes back to being a part of God.
But listen,
come on, you guys got to see this. Come on.
Being part of God. You said that. And you had your laugh track, and then you turned your hand to the camera.
Where did the soul? Where did Jesus' soul go?
Okay, now let's be clear. Your assumption is if his soul goes up to heaven, then somehow it becomes
where
part
does
of the deity.
Jesus' soul go?
Jesus' soul remains forever united to his divine nature.
Okay, where does his divine nature? Is he back being a part of God?
What do you mean back to being part of God? He never ceased being part of God.
But he was human here, right?
And as to his divine nature, he's always God. Okay. He never ceases to be God.
So then when he got a soul attached to him,
a human nature, which includes a human soul,
right?
At his death, he doesn't cease.
Okay, so that soul is now part of the divine nature of Jesus. Where does Jesus' soul go?
Jesus' soul remains forever united to his divine nature.
Okay, where does his divine nature? Is he back being a part of God?
What do you mean back to being part of God? He never ceased being part of God.
But he was human here, right?
And as to his divine nature, he's always God. He never ceases to be God.
So then when he got a soul attached to him,
a human nature, which includes a human soul,
right?
At his death, he doesn't cease.
Okay, so that soul.
So again, now he flops back to saying human nature with the human soul. So which is it, Anthony? You have a doctrine that says you have Christ in the Incarnation. He quotes Chalcedon, one person with two natures. He's one person, which is the divine person prior to the Incarnation, and he had the divine nature, of course, supposedly anyway. He takes on human flesh, adds a human nature to himself, keeps that, which is supposedly a soul and a body. Then at the ascension to heaven, he discards the body, gets rid of the human body. And the question is, with merely the human soul, is that still a full human nature? And is it a human person? That's a question that you need to answer. Because you keep flip-flopping back and forth. Is it the human nature or not? If not, then Christ is not fully human right now. He's partly human because he doesn't have a human body. So he's not fully man. Or on the other hand, if you say that he is fully man, apart from the human body, then that means that the human soul is sufficient in order to be fully human. So, which you contradicted before, you said you needed a soul and body. So you're jammed either way you slice it, bro.
Soul is now part of the divine nature of Jesus. Allah.
That soul remains united in his person.
Yes.
His soul,
so God,
his divine nature.
So it's a part of him.
That's your discharge.
Is it a part of God or not?
It is his. He has a divine nature and a human nature.
Is that soul, because his human body is dead, so his human soul, is it a part of God or not?
It is not a part of his divine nature.
It's not a part of God or not?
It's not divine nature.
So it's a part of him.
That's your discharge.
Is it a part of God or not?
It is his. He has a divine nature and a human nature.
Is that soul, because his human body is dead, so his human soul, is it a part of God or not?
It is not a part of his divine nature.
It's not a part of God or not?
It's not part of his divine nature.
So Jesus' soul is not a part of God?
It's not part of his divine nature.
It's a very simple question.
It's a very simple answer.
Is it a part of God, or yes or no?
It's a very simple answer. His soul is his human nature, not his divine nature. Jesus, that person, has two natures. Divine.
Again, what did he say? His soul is his human nature. Which one is it? Is his soul his human nature, or his soul and human body his human nature? Can't be the same. That's a contradiction, my friend. Which one is it? Is the soul sufficient to be a fully human nature and the body is merely accidental, or is the soul necessary but not sufficient, and that the human body is needed in order to be considered a fully human thing, fully human nature. Anthony Rogers has flip-flopped several times on this issue, and it's unclear which one it is. I don't know if he himself has a settled position because he's just going back and forth on it.
I'm human. You keep wanting to conflate the two. So Christian theology has always said that's not true.
So when Jesus died,
after doing Da'if for so long, for the first time, you're just now learning that's not Christian theology.
Anthony,
we got it on film.
Anthony,
you said it.
Anthony,
you
this
said
is the first time, as I said, that the way you're explaining it, right? Because other Christians explain it differently. But let me tell you. Okay, let me tell you this. The question you're not answering: that soul that got created, is that a part of God? Yes or no?
Not in the sense you're asking.
Okay, thank you. So right? the soul of Jesus is not a part of God.
In the
Got
sense
it.
that you're asking,
thank
you're
you.
assuming it's part of his divine nature.
Okay, so you're saying Jesus' soul, his human body's dead, but his soul is not a part of God. Thank you. I got it.
Absolutely.
Okay, even after he died.
That's just classic Christianity.
Even after he died.
Welcome to Christianity 101.
So Jesus' soul is in heaven?
Yes.
So Jesus will be God, and his soul will be in heaven.
Why are you doing this?
Because God, I mean, you will be in heaven, right?
Yeah, and I'm not
you're
going to be God.
But your soul is separate,
right?
Your
soul's in heaven, then it's part of God.
No, I didn't. I never said that. I never said that. I did not make that assumption. This is a flat mistruth, I'll say, right?
If that's not your assumption,
let me explain it to you again. Okay, let me explain my assumptions, okay? Let me explain you said Jesus did not have a soul before the womb of Mary. Let me speak now, right? Jesus comes to the womb of Mary. God creates a body for Jesus and a soul for Jesus. Now Jesus is a body, a soul, and a divine nature, according to you. Then he lives in life, and he lives with those three components. Now at the cross, according to you, his body dies, right? And his soul and his divine nature go back to being a part of God. So now...
Where's the conjunction? Soul and divine nature.
That's what I said. Okay. Yeah, go back to being a part of God.
No, I didn't say that. That's where you keep making the false turn.
So where does the soul go?
You're confusing location with ontology.
Okay.
You seem to think that Christ's location means some fundamental change in his ontology.
Christ on
That's
earth,
a complete category.
Christ on earth was God walking around, right?
This whole time in this argument, you've been saying that you object to the incarnation because it's irrational, and now you're being as irrational as possible.
I'm not.
You keep making a false turn that rests on the false assumption that if Jesus goes to the Father, then something about his ontology changes. That's just utterly fallacious.
Okay, let me. When Jesus was walking around on earth, when Jesus was walking around, was he God himself?
He was both God and man.
Okay, so as God, he was walking on earth.
Absolutely.
In a human form.
With a human body, absolutely.
And a human soul.
And a human soul.
And that changed.
What changed?
When he died on the cross.
His body died, went to the dust. His soul remained his soul, but never his divine nature. It's still not his part of his divine nature. So his soul then never becomes part of his divine nature.
So his soul will never be part of God.
It'll never be part of his divine nature. Christ is one person.
I got you. Thank you.
I get a divine person. He has two natures.
I understand your answer.
Okay.
Thank you. I don't.
So note again what he said. Again, using classical Chalcedonian Christology, Rogers says, look, Christ is one person, a divine person. He says that Christ is a divine person, a single person with two complete natures. Now, I've argued that Chalcedonian Christology is, by definition, is Nestorian, and there's no really way to get around Nestorianism other than to just embrace contradictions like J.C. Beale. But yeah, I'm gonna read another quote from Craig in a little bit to kind of solidify and really drive home this issue of personhood and nature, see what's really going on with the incarnation here. But let's see if we can power through some of this and try to finish it up, inshallah.
Don't agree with it?
Okay, well,
but that's fine. Okay,
sure. You understand what it is now.
David, do you have the same?
Do you understand?
Do you agree that the soul of Christ is not a part of God?
It's not a part of his divine nature.
You believe that? David would.
That's basic Christianity.
I mean, many Christians here, preachers and pastors, have said the soul of Christ is a part of God, right? But you're saying it's not. Okay, I understand. You're saying the soul of Christ was created, and when Christ died, his soul does not become God.
Absolutely not.
Okay, his soul is in heaven.
So let me just say this then. I can't speak for other Christians, right? In this sense, the people you talk to, right? I'm not going to say you're misrepresenting them. There are possibilities, right? No, I'm saying they might be speaking less than precisely, or you might be misunderstanding them. I can tell you this, even with all the laugh tracks going on, I can tell you this: historic, classic Christianity, in terms of its official formal creeds and confessions, teaches exactly what I just told you. Right? The Chalcedonian Creed, which is historic Christianity in its affirmation of the natures of Christ, has always affirmed that Christ had a fully human nature, and those two natures forever are distinct. His human nature could never be his divine nature.
So the soul of Christ is not a part of God.
It's not a part of his divine essence, his nature, right? And this goes back to a fundamental distinction of Christianity that I think we agree on. And you would hold it as a Muslim, not as I'm not saying you hold this. The creator-creature distinction, an absolute distinction between the two.
Yes.
And so as Christians, we affirm that distinction, and we don't believe the Incarnation ever blurs that distinction.
But we believe Jesus was a creation. Walaikum salam.
But you believe he only was a human being.
He was a creation.
Yeah.
But you believe he was a creation and the creator.
We believe that he was the creator who took upon himself a human nature.
So there you go. That's what the contradiction is. The contradiction isn't that he's one or the other. It's that he's both simultaneously. How is it, like Craig said, that a single person can have two sets of contradictory attributes? That's what the contradiction is. And Rogers hasn't really resolved that, as far as I can tell, really at all.
So again, that means you mixed the two.
Which never become mixed. Again, if you read the Chalcedonian Creed, it says without admixture, without intermixing. So classic Christianity has always said those two natures remain distinct. They're both natures of the divine word. They belong to the word, but they never become the other. His divine nature forever remains divine. His human nature forever remains human.
But his human nature started at the womb of Mary,
because it's human.
Right? And his body died, and his soul will live, but never be a part of God.
It'll always be united in his one person. It'll never be his divine nature.
In the one person with the Father?
Yeah.
So soul then is now united with the Father.
The Son is always one with the Father.
Okay.
There's no change to the divine nature.
There is, but you just added a soul to it.
No.
It's united with it, right?
You don't even.
Is the soul united with Jesus forever or not?
It's hypostatically. It's not ontologically.
Wow.
They don't become fused. I think you're thinking in terms of.
That's what it sounds
like,
right?
There's some tangible substance called deity.
No.
There's this other tangible stuff, and they get glued or something.
Let me just explain. Okay, so this is when your idea of God, right? There are three components, right?
What do you mean by what components are you referring to here?
Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost.
I wasn't sure if you were still talking about Christ, divine nature, human nature.
Oh, that is Christ. It's one of the three, right?
Yeah, okay,
Okay, I got you.
You're talking about here.
I get you. I know what I like to be clear. So what I'm talking about is God, in your understanding, has three distinct components that come together as one. The Father, no.
Okay. That would be like us saying you believe that Allah has these components, his face and his shin and so on, that come together as Allah.
It wouldn't, because it wouldn't. Let me explain why not. Because Allah's yad, for example, doesn't detach and come walk around on earth.
But we don't think
right?
Christ detached.
Okay, but you do say that God took on human form.
Yeah. Human nature.
Okay, so
we also believe that God is everywhere, so there's no
it's not like when I say took on, that's metaphorical. I don't mean
if God is everywhere, then what's the difference between you and Jesus? You're both God.
No.
God is everywhere, so God's in you, right?
See, why do basic terms break down like that?
Because you don't
God is everywhere to saying God is everything. Those are two different terms.
So that's the thing. Jesus was God, you're saying, not present at Jesus. So that's why you're trying to confuse the issue, because there's a distinction. You're saying
I'm making the distinction. You're not.
I am, and explain it. So when you say God is everywhere, you don't mean he's everywhere in the sense that Jesus was here. Right?
In the sense that Jesus as incarnate?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
So there is that's your breakdown. Okay, so let's take it back to that. So when Jesus was walking around, it is different from God just being everywhere according to you.
Because there's a hypostatic. You know the term
Thank you.
hypostatic?
Yeah.
Okay.
What do you add?
There's a hypostatic union. Hypostatic pertains to the person.
So that means
the person of the Son is not a tangible thing. He can be present without taking up any space. We're not saying he occupies space.
But right now, this here, us walking around, according to you, God is everywhere in a sense.
Everything.
Excellent, got you. But when Jesus is walking around, now this is different than just saying God is everywhere, because you're saying, thank you. Okay, so when Jesus came to earth.
All right, so folks, we got about 17 minutes or 16 minutes left in the video. I think that's enough really to capture what the main arguments and thrust of the discussion was about. What I want to do here is I want to recap, because I don't want the video to go on for too long. What most of you have already seen the video, so the rest of the 15 minutes is not that big of a deal. The last 5 minutes or so are them just kind of wrapping it up and whatever. What I want to do now is I want to recap what I think the main points of the conversation were, what the problems were with Roger's response to the Sheikh, and add on a little bit to what the Sheikh said to explain pretty fundamentally what the contradictions or problems are. So first thing we opened up was Roger's claim that we don't know anything about God apart from revelation. I don't know what he means by that. Is he talking about only specific revelation that we can't know from the general revelation and natural revelation? If he's saying that, that's a huge problem. But we'll let him slide on that. We're not going to cut. We'll cut him some slack on that. Maybe he meant, and he was including general revelation. Second thing is David would explain the difference between something that is highly improbable, like a time machine, and something that is a contradiction, which is impossible, like a square circle. We agreed, and fundamentally the Sheikh agreed. And that's why he argued on the basis of saying this is a contradiction. It's a square circle or a married bachelor. And I don't think they ever really responded to that point. Then they went on to the issue of the eternal Quran and speech is an attribute of Allah and this type of stuff. I'm going to do a full video, inshallah, on the issue of the eternal Quran and the divine speech of Allah, the Kalam Allah, and this issue. And honestly, the issue of that speech is a divine attribute. If you just watch my video on divine attributes, it pretty much covers it. An attribute is a person. It's not. An attribute is not a person, I should say. It's not analogous to a person. Anyway, you guys can watch that video. Other point was he claimed that the Quran is a pale man that intercedes for man on Judgment Day. He said it was in Tirmidhi. He never actually found it, so I don't think it's there. So the Sheikh corrected him on that. Other point was, and this is the main crux of the issue, Roger said that it wasn't a contradiction because just like man is both immaterial and physical, meaning soul and body, so is Christ both God and man. So we have to check. If that was his main line of defense and those two things are not analogous, then he hasn't really solved anything, right? So that's why I spent a lot of time on this analogy. I'm saying it's not analogous. Now, Rogers went further on in the last 20, 30 minutes to give conflicting narratives. And this is just a question straightforward for you, Mr. Rogers. Does the human nature necessitate a human body such that without a human body, the human soul is not fully human? If that's the case, and Christ ascended to heaven without a human body, and a human body is necessary to be fully human, and he doesn't have that right now, then Christ right now is not fully human. And I don't think you want to say that. So you can either say that and bite the bullet, and then you've got a huge problem because Christ right now is not fully human, fully God and fully man, because he's not fully man. Second option you got is to say, well, yeah, right, Jake, you actually got a big point there. I want to maintain that Christ is fully human, even in heaven, apart from the human body. Well, then that means the human body is accidental to the human nature and is not a necessary component of the human nature. Therefore, drawing an analogy between man having a human body and human soul is not the same as Christ having two natures. It's not the same at all. Okay. Third issue we brought up. The intermediate state, when human beings die before the general resurrection. Do you believe in the intermediate state, Mr. Rogers? If no, then how do you interpret 1 Corinthians 15? And I'd like to understand what your understanding is of death, even for the believers. Do they have some sort of soulish existence apart from the human body before they are resurrected on Judgment Day and the body conjoins with the soul again? If you say no, then I got to really try to understand what your Christianity is, because my understanding is that is the basics part of Christianity, is affirming the intermediate state. And this idea that the soul and he even said it, that the soul still exists. He said the body is dead, but the soul is alive and still has existence. So if it has some form of existence, is that fully a human nature? In the same way Christ only has a human soul, is that still a full human nature, or is that only part of a human nature? If you say it's part of a human nature, then me, after my death, and you, Mr. Rogers, we're only partly human until we get our body back. That's a really unfortunate situation. Also, another thing to consider, fourth thing to consider, in the intermediate state, is the human soul a person? Do we cease to be human persons when we do not have or possess our human body? If the answer is yes, then what sort of existence is that? He's not fully human in terms of nature, and he's not a person either. That would mean that the body is necessary for human personhood, in which case that casts doubt on your stance of abortion, that abortion is prohibited at the moment of conception, even when the body is not really there. There's no full body. There's no full human body there. So the full human body is not there, yet you're saying it's a human person. That suggests that a full human body is not necessary at the time in order to be considered a person. So that's another problem for you. What's this fifth problem or sixth? I don't even know what we're on. We're racking up so many problems here from this stream with Mr. Rogers and his conception of the human nature and human personhood. Well, the other point, as I mentioned, if it's not a human person, then it's not a human person nor a full human nature. And then the question is, what are the necessary and sufficient conditions in order to be considered a human person? Ontologically speaking, what is a human person? What are the components or the thing or the multiple things that are necessary and sufficient, meaning with these things, it necessitates and is sufficient to be considered a human person? If you don't know the answer to that question, how are you calling a baby in the womb a human person? What is it, ontologically speaking, that makes it a human person? Now, we, the Muslims, I'm saying, I don't want to speak for the Shaykh here because I don't think he didn't really go too much into the Chalcedonian Creed, so I'm going to do it because Rogers quoted it. He said, this is standard Christian theology in the Creed of Chalcedon, which it is, which he says that Christ is fundamentally one person with two complete natures. Now, the human nature, he had a human body, a human soul, and a human will. Now, the question is, what goes to constitute a human person? If you have a human soul, a human body, and a human will, how is that not a human person? But yet you say Christ had all three of those things and was not a human person. That's the whole problem. Because you are saying that Christ was one person, which was the divine person prior to the incarnation. And he had two complete natures, a divine nature, okay, put that to the side, and a human nature, which at least while he was on earth, he had a human body, a human soul, and a human will. If those three things are not sufficient in order to be considered a human person, then ontologically speaking or definitionally, what is a human person? I have never been able to get a straight answer from a Christian on this other than winding up in contradiction or in heresy. Now, I'm going to give you a straight, clear answer from William Lane Craig here precisely on this issue. He tackles it straight on. Now, one thing I like about William Lane Craig, other than the fact that he steals Muslim arguments, no, I'm just kidding about that. We're just joking. Take it easy. Take it easy, people. But apart from him using the Kalam cosmological argument, which I like, what I like about Craig is because he's a philosopher and he understands logic, what Craig does both, and you can check this out, people who know, those who don't know. I try to expose this to an audience, Christian and Muslim, is that Craig, because of the logical problems with the two fundamental doctrines of Trinitarian Christianity, I don't want to lump all Christians into it, are the Trinity, which is three persons, one nature, God, Incarnation, one person, two natures, God and man. He says these are contradictory. Classically speaking, they're contradictory. There's no way to get around it. So what Craig does is he says, look, you got two options. Either you affirm the historic Christian doctrine of the Trinity incarnation, and you've got contradiction on your hand and incoherence, or you change the position slightly and you take what the church has considered always a heretical position. Now, Craig, on the one hand, I got to give it to him, to be honest, and say historic Christianity, they've got serious issues here. They got contradictions and incoherence. I, as a philosopher and somebody who loves logic and critical thinking, I can't just latch onto this contradiction. I'd rather take a heresy over that. Jake, on the other hand, is saying, Craig, listen, brother, you're a good guy. Just think about it. Go a little bit further. Reject the contradictory stuff, but reject the heresy also and embrace the true deen, which is Islam. Go a bit further, because people, the Christians, once they really get their hands on this stuff, they're not going to like that anyway. They're not going to be really supporting you like that, because you're taking a heretical position. But I got to give it to Craig. The problem and the questions posing that I'm asking for Anthony Rogers that Rogers can't answer, and neither can Tweedledee or Tweedledum, Mr. Sam Shamoon or David Wood. None of those three can answer these questions that I'm asking about the incarnation. And because they can't answer it, because it leads fundamentally to a contradiction, Craig says, look, you guys can't answer that stuff, but I'll answer it for you. I'll tell you straight up and down and answer it for you. It is a contradiction. Now watch what Craig says. I'm going to add it to the stream, and I'm going to read you a quote from an article here. And look, it says, does Dr. Craig have an orthodox Christology? And it has audio to it. It's 13 minutes and 46 seconds. But I'm just going to read you the relevant section on this point. What goes to constitute a human person? What is a human person, ontologically speaking? We went into what was a human nature, ontologically speaking. What is a human person, ontologically speaking? So he's speaking with Kevin Harris, who's the co-host of his show. I'm just highlighting here what the part is that I'm going to read. This is the question that was asked to Craig. The audio is there if you want, but it's more powerful in terms of the written format here. So this is Kevin Harris, who's the host. He asked the question. He goes on to say in the article, now remember, when the question is asked, does Dr. Craig have an orthodox Christology? The answer is no, he doesn't. Now, he tries to defend that he does, but everybody knows he doesn't. He doesn't even believe that Christ had a human soul, and he doesn't believe that Christ had he doesn't believe that Christ had a human soul. So let's see why. Let's see why Craig doesn't think that he had a human soul, or he also doesn't think that he had a human will. He's a monotheletist, which means he believes that Christ did not have a human will, which was condemned by the Catholic Church. And no, he's not a Catholic, but it was one of the councils that actually condemned this. Now, I don't know if Rogers wants to go that far. I don't think he does. I think he holds that Christ had a human soul. I mean, no, we know he holds that Christ had a human soul. He didn't explicitly mention will, but I'm pretty sure he does. So Rogers says Christ has a human soul, body, and will. Now, what does Craig say about this? Kevin Harris says, he goes on to say in the article that contrary to what you will sometimes read in rumors, William Lane Craig is combating Nestorianism, which is the idea that Christ was two persons. What is Richard telling us here about your view? Dr. Craig says, in response to this guy he's responding to, he says, what he is saying here is that if Christ had a merely human soul and merely human body, and he just means to say just a human soul and human body, in addition to the divine person, then to me, it is very difficult to understand why there wouldn't be two persons in Christ, one human and one divine. Think about it. And he goes on to give an example. He asks a question. What goes to constitute a human person? That's what I'm asking Rogers. Can't give me an answer. Is he going to appeal to mystery, or is he going to answer the question straightforward? Craig answers. He says, it is a rational soul and body, meaning a human soul and a human body. So Rogers says that Christ did have a human soul and human body. Question is, if he had a human soul, body, and will, how was he not a human person? Craig says, if you have a rational soul and a humanoid body, you have a human person. That is all it takes. So, if you say that Christ had a merely human soul and human body, then why wasn't there a human person, Jesus? So he's asking this. This is a question for you, Mr. Rogers. Dr. Craig is asking you a question now. If Christ had a human soul and a human body, why was he not a human person if soul and body are sufficient for human personhood? But what does Craig say? What does Craig say? Yet orthodoxy denies that. Orthodoxy says there is only one person in Christ, or who is Christ, and that person is divine, which Rogers affirmed. There is no human person, Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is a divine person with two natures. Jesus Christ is a divine person with two natures. He says, I can't make sense of that if we say that Christ had, in addition to his divine person, a human soul conjoined with a human body. That seems to me to be sufficient for another person, in which case you have two sons, one the divine son and the other a human son. So he says if you say that Christ had a human soul and a human body, then that's sufficient for human personhood. Orthodoxy denies that, which is what the contradiction is. He says that it seems to him that if Christ had a human soul and a human body, then there would be two sons, one the divine son, one the human son, two persons, which is Nestorianism, which was deemed heretical at the Council of Chalcedon. So he says, so how does Craig get out of this problem that he's asking Mr. Rogers and what I've been asking Mr. Rogers for the past hour and a half, which he can't answer? What goes to constitute a human person? And I'm talking ontologically speaking. Don't give me some word salad definition. So I am constrained to avoid Nestorianism. This is what Craig says. In order to avoid Nestorianism, he has to reject something. What does he have to reject? He says here, I think Apollinarius, which was another heretic, he was considered a heretic, has pointed the route that we could take. Namely, you say that there is a common constituent which is shared by the human nature and the divine nature. And this is the very thing that Mr. Rogers denied. He said, we don't say that the human nature and the divine nature mixed or mingled in any way, because that would be another heresy, which was known as Eutychianism. The two natures did not mix, which Chalcedon says, but Craig is going against Chalcedon. Let's be honest. He's saying that Christ didn't have a human soul. He's saying that Christ didn't have a human will. And he's saying that the natures had a common constituent, which is heretical. It's Eutychianism. He said that would be the person. What is the person? The soul of the human nature is the person of the second person of the Trinity. So the second person of the Trinity, which was a person prior to the Incarnation, for him, he takes Apollinarius' route, which Apollinarius was considered a heretic because his doctrine resulted in Christ not being fully man, which Chalcedon wanted to affirm. Why? Because he denied that Christ had a human soul, partly because of this issue, because he recognized if Christ had a human soul, then you got two persons, which is Nestorianism, which is also a heresy. So he's like, dude, which way am I going to go? So Craig agrees with Apollinarius. He says, look, the only way to avoid Nestorianism or the two-person problem, which is a heresy, condemn that Chalcedon, is I got to go the Apollinarian route and say that Christ had something that was shared between the two natures, which is Eutychianism. And the thing that was shared between the two natures was the one person, the soul of Christ, which was the divine soul, the divine person, replaced in terms of its human ontology or constituency. It replaced the human soul so that Christ didn't have two souls, meaning Christ didn't have a divine soul that was linked with a human soul. Christ didn't have a created human soul in that sense. He says, by having this common constituent, there is overlap, which Rogers explicitly denied. There is overlap, so to speak, between the divine and the human natures. You can't say that there's overlap between the divine and human natures. That's the problem. But what Craig is saying here, guys, you have to really understand this. What is a human person? If you say that a human person is a body, soul, And if you want to include spirit and will, whatever you want to include, the question is, what goes to constitute a human person? Craig says a body-soul composite, a human body and human soul composite, is sufficient for human personhood. If Christ had that, then he would be another person, which would be heresy. So you got to avoid that. You have to avoid that. Now, so Craig, what he does is in order to avoid the logical contradiction of affirming that Christ had a human soul and human body and yet wasn't a human person, because he's like, dude, that doesn't make any sense. What's a human person then? He says that Christ didn't have a human soul and he also didn't have a human will. He has a different problem. He takes a heretical position that results in a mixture, a common constituent between the two natures, which is Eutychianism, and also Apollinarianism, which Christ wasn't fully human, because if he didn't have a human soul, how could he possibly be fully or truly human? On the other hand, the Chalcedonians, which is Rogers and most of, and his other two buddies, David Wood and what's his name, Sam Shamoun, which they've never solved this problem, is you can only go two routes or three. It's a couple different routes. You can go a heretical route like William Lane Craig and say, well, I'm going to go with Apollinarius, and in order to avoid the two-person problem, I said that Christ didn't have a human soul. Or you could go the other route and say, bite the bullet, yeah, Christ was two persons. I'm an historian. So what? And there are people who've done that, like the Assyrian Church of the East, which I believe Sam Shamoun is a part of. So he may go the Nestorian route for all I know. And because I think, and I don't want to go too much further on that point. Third route you could go is to say, hey, it's a mystery, which there's difference between a mystery and a contradiction. A contradiction is an actual claim. And this is what J.C. Beale talks about. It's not a mystery. You're affirming contradictory things. So you can just say, you can go it's a mystery, but it's really not. It's a contradiction. So you never really solved the problem. So you could just delete this video or never watch it, Mr. Rogers and friends. You could do that and just bury your head in the sand, basically. Or you could say, well, yeah, you know what, Jake? You're right. It is a contradiction, but it's a true contradiction. Diatheletism is true, which means it affirms true contradictions. I'm with J.C. Beale, the contradictory Christ. Thank you. Have a nice day. Contradictory Christ. Okay. Shake your hand and walk away. Have a nice day. I can't do anything further. Once you get to a position where you're affirming true contradictions, only Allah can guide you, man. I can't do anything about it. I cannot work with that. I mean, once you say you believe in a square circle, ta-ta, have a nice day. I mean, there's nothing I can do with that. Or you should do what I did. Say, hey, all this stuff is a problem. Reject it. Embrace Islam. At least think about it. I mean, have a conversation with some level-headed Muslims and, consider it. I mean, like I said, at the end of the day, I'm just presenting what I think of the facts of the matter. People are free to take them or reject them, is what it is. But I felt that this was a popular video that was circulating in both Muslim and Christian circles. I felt it needed to be addressed because I felt that Rogers wasn't going to really be able to deal with these. Even if he watches this, I don't think he'll be able to deal with it. And if Mr. Rogers, you do watch this video, this is an open challenge to you. If you would like to debate me on either the Incarnation or the Trinity, that's an open challenge to you right now. I will debate you on the Trinity or Incarnation. Friendly offer. Just putting it out there. Check out my stuff on YouTube. I've debated a whole bunch of Christian academics. I've had a discussion with Samuel Green, which you may be familiar with. I'm sure you are because he's part of writing for Answering Islam. But take it or leave it. It's an open challenge to Mr. Rogers. I would be happy to debate him on either one of those topics because that's what he came in talking to Shaykh Uthman about, was the Trinity and Incarnation. Happy to debate you on that anytime. So we'll see if he'll respond and if we could set that up. But yeah, that's the fundamental issue. What is a human nature? What is a human person? I don't think he really solved those problems, because if you say human person, what is sufficient for human person in terms of its ontology? Is it human body, soul, and will? If not, that's what we have. How are we human persons? If that's sufficient and Christ had that, then he would have to be a human person. Otherwise, it's a contradiction and mystery. I mean, what is it? Same thing with the intermediate state and the idea, how is Christ fully human without a human body right now in heaven? He doesn't have a human body in heaven, according to Rogers, and yet is he fully human or is he partly human? Now he's fully God and partly man. What is it? Same thing with the intermediate state. Are we a human person as a soul? If so, forget about the body now. Think about it. Craig said, look, a human soul and human body seem to be sufficient to have a human person, yet orthodoxy denies it. This is why it's a contradiction. If Christ had a human soul, which he did, then the question is, in the intermediate state, am I still a human person without my body? If I'm not a human person, then that's weird. What is a human person? It's a human soul and body composite, and that's why I lose it. Well, Christ said that anyway. If I am a human person when I'm in the intermediate state, and that's based on the ontology of my soul, and Christ has a human soul when he was on earth and still in heaven and everlastingly, well, then the human soul itself is sufficient for human personhood, in which Christ was a human person at the inception of the incarnation. And he will be everlastingly, which means he's forever an historian. Two persons, two sons, not one son, two sons, son. Anyway, that's it for my presentation or my review of the video. Let me check the comment section, see what we got going on in here. I hope that you guys were relatively respectful. I try to be respectful, even though I think these guys are a bit of a jokers. Let's see what we doing here. I don't think I missed any super chats or anybody becoming members. So unless you guys have any quick things, unless you guys have any quick stuff to send last minute in the form of a super chat, I just want to, once again, wish all the Muslims and Eid Mubarak. I want to also say to the situation that's going on in Israel and Palestine right now, it's terrible, honestly, really unfortunate. Maybe I'll make a video about that. I want to pray for all our brothers and sisters in Philistine and Palestine. May Allah protect them. May Allah, grant them Jannah. And may Allah give the families of those who have lost and are suffering ease in this time of difficulty. Ya Rabbil Alameen. Ameen. Darth. We got Darth became a new member. Salam, bro. Appreciate it. Free Palestine. That's right, Blazing Heat. Free Palestine, bro. Free Palestine. With that being said, guys, I'm going to be doing a stream next Friday I believe on Hamza's Den on the arena. Jake, the Muslim Metaphysician, will be joining Hamza and the crew over there, the arena next Friday, inshallah. I'm going to have a couple more videos coming out soon. If you want to get in on tomorrow, I'm planning on doing an exclusive live stream, which you won't get the YouTube link unless you're a member on either Patreon or YouTube. So do consider becoming a patron on Patreon. The link is always in the description of all my videos, or consider clicking the join button on YouTube. Also, I recently created a PayPal link to where if you don't want to become a monthly member, but you want to just donate a quick little bit to help the dawah and to help the show out, help the YouTube channel out, then you could just send, like, say, $5 thing, which is not a monthly commitment, to my PayPal link, which it will be in the description of this video and all my other ones as well. Those are the best ways to support me as far as furthering the dawah and the work that I'm doing on the channel. As always, guys, we got over 100 people watching. Alhamdulillah. Do consider hitting that like button right now. Everybody like that button. Share this on your social media. Really helps, no matter how big or small your social media networks are. Really helps. Share it with your family and friends. Get it out there, whether Christian, Muslim, or otherwise. And as always, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying it, inshallah. Yeah, like I said, I'm going to be on Hamza's Den next week, next Friday. Got a couple videos going on. If you want to get in on the exclusive live stream tomorrow, consider becoming a Patreon or YouTube member. And that link will get sent out to you guys tomorrow in the morning. Probably do it sometime in the afternoon, Eastern time. So be on the lookout for that. Also, TAP, which is the Thought Adventure podcast that I'm a part of, where we recently just destroyed popular atheist Aaron Ra, made him look like a complete fool, philosophically inept, on the conversation of a necessary being on TAP. People are free to check it out. We did a short review with Brother Sabur Ahmed on SC Dawah channel a few days ago. That's available. But on TAP this weekend on Sunday, we are going to be doing a stream on nihilism, or nihilism, depending on how you want to pronounce it, which is basically the loss of meaning, complete absence of meaning. Does that follow from rejecting God? Is there an absence of meaning apart from God? If you reject God, do you lose all meaning? Our good brother, Yusuf Ponders, who is part of the TAP team, it is me, Yusuf Ponders, Sharif, and Abdul. The four of us will be doing a stream on nihilism Sunday afternoon, so do check that out. Consider doing all the things that I said of supporting me here. Go and support over there. Like, subscribe, share, get that content out there. Really trying to blast this forward. Now, let me just check. Quick couple things in the chat. Unless there are more things going on in the chat, I don't think there's anything. All right, guys, any personal questions, you can always message me on Twitter, Facebook, or email. All the links are in the description of the videos. I hope that you all had a blessed Ramadan, even with the unfortunate situation going on in Palestine right now. But may Allah make it easy for our brothers and sisters and for the ummah. Ameen. Anyway, guys, until next time, inshallah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.